What happened to the most powerful private army in medieval history? An organization that owned land across every Christian nation in Europe. That had its own fleet of ships, its own banking system, its own laws. That answered to nobody except the Pope himself. An army of warrior monks who had fought in every major crusade for nearly 200 years. And then, in a single day, they were gone. Friday, October 13th, 1307. The day a king destroyed the most powerful military order in history and got away with it. Today we go through the whole story, the rise, the power, the betrayal, and the questions that historians are still arguing about 700 years later. Let's go. To understand what happened to the Templars, you first need to understand what they actually were, because the reality is both more impressive and more complicated than the conspiracy theories suggest. It starts in Jerusalem, 1119, 20 years after the First Crusade captured the city. The roads to Jerusalem were extraordinarily dangerous. Pilgrims who had traveled thousands of kilometers to reach the holy city were being robbed and murdered just outside the walls by bandits. A French knight named Hugues de Payens approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a proposal. He and 8 companions would form a dedicated military order specifically to protect pilgrims on the roads. Baldwin gave them quarters in what was believed to be the ancient Temple of Solomon, and from that location came their name. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The Knights Templar, the structure. The Templars were a military order, meaning they were simultaneously monks and soldiers. They took monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and then they went to war. The iconic image, white mantle with a red cross, was granted by Pope Eugene III in 1147. The white represented purity. The red cross represented willingness to die for the faith. The order had a strict hierarchy. At the top, the Grand Master who answered only to the Pope. Below him, knights, sergeants, chaplains, and a vast network of lay brothers and administrators who managed the order's enormous financial operations. And those financial operations are where things get really interesting. The banking system that changed history. Here's the part most people don't know. The Knights Templar essentially invented modern banking. The problem for medieval pilgrims was simple. You couldn't carry large amounts of gold or silver safely across thousands of kilometers of dangerous roads. Bandits would take it. You'd be robbed. You'd die. The Templars solved this. A pilgrim could deposit money at a Templar house in France, receive a coded document, travel to Jerusalem, and withdraw an equivalent amount at a Templar house there. No gold on the road, no risk. This was essentially a letter of credit, the foundation of modern banking. Kings and nobles began using Templar financial services. The order managed the royal treasury of France. They issued loans to European monarchs. They financed wars. The Knights Templar were the most powerful financial institution in Europe, possibly the world, and that, more than anything else, is what killed them. Let's talk about what the Templars actually built. Because by the early 14th century, this organization had accumulated a level of power and wealth that had no parallel in the medieval world: the land. The Knights Templar owned property in virtually every Christian kingdom in Europe and the Middle East. Thousands of estates, farms, vineyards, and mills across France, England, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and the Crusader states. These weren't just military outposts. They were functioning economic enterprises that generated enormous revenue used to fund military operations in the Holy Land. The Templars also owned a fleet of ships operating in the Mediterranean. They controlled ports. They managed trade routes. The military power. At their peak, the Templars could field several hundred knights and thousands of supporting troops. In the context of medieval warfare, where a battle might involve a few thousand fighters total, this was a significant independent military force. They built and maintained some of the most formidable castles in the medieval world. Croc de Chevalier in modern Syria, Chateau Pèlerin on the coast of what is now Israel, fortresses that represented the cutting edge of medieval military engineering. They fought in every major crusade. They held the line when other forces broke. They suffered catastrophic losses and rebuilt repeatedly. The Templar battle record is extraordinary. They were not invincible. They suffered devastating defeats, but their commitment to fighting even in hopeless situations became legendary. The legal independence. Perhaps most significantly, the Templars operated outside the normal legal framework of any kingdom. They paid no taxes to anyone. Papal bulls exempted them from all local taxation and episcopal authority. They could not be tried in any local court. Only the Pope himself could sit in judgment over a Templar. They moved freely across all borders. Their property could not be seized by any king. In a world where power meant control over land, money, and military force, the Knights Templar had all three, independently, without accountability to any earthly authority. For a medieval king like Philip IV of France, deeply in debt, desperate for money, watching this untaxable, unaccountable organization operate freely within his kingdom, this was intolerable. To understand the destruction of the Knights Templar, you need to understand one man, Philip IV of France, known to history as Philip the Fair, referring to his appearance, not his character. Philip the Fair. Philip IV was one of the most capable and ruthless monarchs in medieval French history. He was brilliant, politically sophisticated, and absolutely determined to consolidate royal power at the expense of every competing authority, the nobility, the church, and the Templars. He was also deeply, catastrophically in debt. Philip had borrowed enormous sums from the Knights Templar to finance his wars against England, wars against Flanders. The treasury of France was essentially controlled by Templar finances. He had already expelled the Jews from France in 1306, seizing their assets to fill the treasury. He had debased the French currency. He had taxed the French clergy into open conflict with the Pope, and still the debts remained, most of them owed to the Knights Templar. The plan Philip needed to destroy the Templars, but he couldn't just attack them. They were too powerful, too well connected, protected by the Pope himself. So he built a legal case. Starting around 1305, Philip's agents began collecting accusations against the Templars. Heresy, idol worship, blasphemy, obscene initiation rituals, denial of Christ. The specific accusations included: the Templars denied Christ 3 times during initiation, that they spat on the cross, that they worshipped an idol called Baphomet, that they engaged in obscene acts during their secret ceremonies. Were any of these true? Almost certainly not, or at most, heavily distorted versions of legitimate practices. But accusations of heresy in medieval Europe were extraordinarily powerful weapons, and Philip intended to use them. Philip needed the cooperation of the new pope, Clement V, a Frenchman who owed his position largely to Philip's political support. On the night of October 12, 1307, sealed orders were delivered to royal officers across France with instructions not to be opened until dawn. At dawn on Friday, October 13th, simultaneously across all of France, every Knights Templar who could be found was arrested. The Grand Master of the Order, Jacques de Molay, was taken in Paris. Hundreds of knights were arrested in a single morning. Some historians believe this is the origin of the superstition around Friday the 13th. It's disputed, but the event itself is absolutely documented. The most powerful military order in medieval history had been taken down in a single morning. by paperwork and sealed orders. What followed the arrests was one of the most infamous judicial proceedings in medieval history, and it tells you something deeply uncomfortable about how power operates. The confessions. The arrested Templars were subjected to interrogation by the French Inquisition, and the interrogation methods of the medieval Inquisition were not gentle. Under torture, dozens of Templars confessed to the charges, denying Christ, spitting on the cross, worshipping Baphomet. Jacques de Molay himself, the Grand Master, confessed. Under what conditions, we can only imagine. Later, many Templars recanted their confessions. They stated publicly that they had confessed only under torture and that the charges were false. In medieval law, recanting a confession of heresy was itself heresy, punishable by death. The Council of Vienne, 1312 Pope Clement V, convened the Council of Vienne in 1311 to deal formally with the Templar question. The council did not find the Templars guilty of heresy. The evidence was insufficient. But Philip IV pressured Clement relentlessly. In 1312, Clement dissolved the Knights Templar by papal decree. Not convicted, not found guilty, simply dissolved, abolished, erased from existence by administrative order. The Templar properties were officially transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, another military order. In practice, Philip IV seized most of the French Templar assets directly. The debt was effectively cancelled. The creditor had been destroyed. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, spent 7 years in prison awaiting final judgment. In March 1314, he was brought before a public assembly in Paris to hear his sentence, life imprisonment as a convicted heretic who had confessed. Instead, de Molay did something nobody expected. He recanted, publicly. In front of the crowd, the judges and representatives of the king and pope, he declared that the confessions had been false, that the Templars were innocent, that the only crimes he had committed were the crimes of cowardice in confessing to things that were not true to save himself from torture. Philip IV had him burned at the stake that same evening. According to chronicles written shortly after, as de Molay burned, he called out to King Philip and Pope Clement to meet him before God within a year. Pope Clement V died 33 days later. Philip IV of France died 7 months after that. Coincidence? Almost certainly. But in the medieval world, and honestly, it's hard not to feel the weight of it even today. Okay, here's the question everyone actually wants answered. The Templar treasure, the legendary wealth of the most powerful financial institution in medieval Europe. Where did it go? The night before. Here's a documented fact that feeds every conspiracy theory. The night before the arrests on October 13th, 1307, Templar ships left the port of La Rochelle on the French Atlantic coast. Where they went, nobody knows. The ships were never found. Their cargo was never documented. When Philip's agents seized the Paris Temple, the headquarters of Templar financial operations in France, they found significantly less treasure than they expected. The accounts were there, the records were there, the gold was largely gone. The theories. This gap between the expected wealth and what was actually found has fueled 7 centuries of speculation. Theory 1. The treasure was moved to Scotland, where the Templars found refuge with Robert the Bruce, who had been excommunicated and had nothing to lose by sheltering them. Some researchers connect this to the later founding of Freemasonry. There is no solid evidence for any of this. Theory 2. The treasure went to Portugal, where the Knights Templar were never disbanded. They simply changed their name to the Order of Christ and continued operating. Vasco da Gama sailed under their cross. Columbus may have had Templar connections. Interesting. Unproven. Theory 3. And this is the most boring but probably most accurate answer. The Templars had been spending their wealth for years. Financing crusades is expensive. Maintaining castles is expensive. Running a banking operation across all of Europe is expensive. By 1307, the legendary Templar treasure may have already been largely spent. The mystery endures because the mundane explanation is unsatisfying. We want the treasure to exist. We want the secret to be real. That desire for hidden knowledge, for secret power operating behind history, is exactly why the Templar myth has never died. The Knights Templar were dissolved in 1312. Officially, they ceased to exist, and yet, in the centuries that followed, the Templars became the foundation for some of the most enduring conspiracy theories in Western history. Freemasonry, the Illuminati, the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, secret societies controlling world events from the shadows. None of these connections have solid historical evidence, but they persist. They multiply. They appear in every generation in new forms. Why? Because the story of the Knights Templar contains something that resonates at a very deep level. A powerful institution, destroyed not by military defeat, but by political betrayal. A leader who chose to die telling the truth rather than live having confessed to lies. A treasure that vanished into history. It's a story about power, about corruption, about what happens when wealth and independence make you a threat to those who hold official authority. Power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Lord Acton. Philip IV of France didn't destroy the Knights Templar because they were heretics. He destroyed them because they were powerful, independent, and he owed them money. The lesson of the Knights Templar isn't about treasure or conspiracy. It's about what happens when an institution becomes so powerful that those in authority feel threatened by its existence. That lesson hasn't aged a single day. That's the real story of the Knights Templar. No treasure maps, no secret codes, just power, money, betrayal, and one man who chose to die telling the truth. Which is honestly more dramatic than any conspiracy theory. If this series is doing it for you, subscribe. Every week we go deeper into the history that actually shaped the world we live in. Drop a comment. Do you think the Templar treasure is still out there somewhere? I genuinely want to know what you think. Next video, the Black Death. How a disease that nobody understood wiped out half of Europe in 5 years, and why the world that came after was completely unrecognizable from the world that came before. See you next week. Stay sharp.